listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor, and I'm here again with my buddy, Stuart. Say hi, Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
So Stuart McLean of McLean Direct, is that correct?
That is correct.
And, a few episodes ago, I talked about my Mount Rushmore, the 4 people that were most important in my development. Some were like people I met, and then some were, the experts, many that passed on. And one guy I left off was John Caples, and I felt that was a mistake because he's one of the, along with Claude Hopkins, I would say he's the 2 most important person to study. Would you agree?
Yeah, he's certainly up there. I like the Mount Rushmore analogy. I've had to read John Caples back when I first got into the direct marketing business, and I'm glad I did. I was just perusing the 5th edition there before we started, and I was nodding my head with all of the lessons that had sunk in.
You probably read like a 2nd or 3rd edition. That was so long ago.
Probably. I probably could have almost gotten it autographed, maybe. I don't know.
It's interesting. I've read the book 3 times. How many times have you read it?
Well, I've read it through, but I've gone back and reread sections, especially if I was having trouble, like with headlines and that sort of thing.
Right. His first 5 chapters are on headlines.
I've used it as a textbook, and I remember an early, if I can bring this up, when I'd first gotten into the business, and I'd only been in it for 4 or 5 months as a junior copywriter, and I was taught by my mentor that how important headlines were. And of course, I thought, oh, well, it's the inside contents that I'm slaving over. That's what's important. And I went home, and there in my apartment was a trash can. And
right.
The trash can was directly opposite the mailboxes for the people that lived in my building, and there were 2 elevators, one on either side of the trash can with the elevator button right above the trash can. And as I'm waiting for the elevator, this guy comes in behind me in a business suit. He opens his mailbox with his key, and then he starts sorting his mail while we waited for the elevator to arrive. He must have had 8 or 9 pieces of mail.
And most didn't make it up.
Most went right in the trash without even being opened.
Well, that's why Gary Halbert says it's so important to be in pile A, to make it up to the apartment.
Well, I bet, I saw him tuck 1 piece of mail under his armpit as he was sorting through. I'll bet that was a bill that he couldn't ignore.
Right.
But almost, I think he kept 2 or 3 at the most of the 8 or 9 pieces of mail he had. And boy, did that just sink in with me about how important headlines were and the outer envelope. So
it's a transformational lesson.
Oh, it was worth so much, and it's been that way ever since. And I've still struggled over with it. And I've had employers, unfortunately, who poo-poo really spending time on that.
Oh, that's a mistake.
I had one who took 5 years to recruit a particular client, kept touching base with them, seeing them, writing them, calling them. And then he and I each wrote an appeal for them. And he got his appeal done in about 4, 5, 6 hours at most. And I took a couple of days to write mine. And I thought to myself, what are you doing? You took 5 years to recruit this client, and you took 5 hours to write the letter? Mm-hmm. And he had given it to one of my colleagues, and my colleagues came in to me and he says, you got to talk him out of sending this. I said, I'm not going to go to the guy who signs my paychecks and tell him he shouldn't send his own work.
Although there are exceptions. Gary Halbert would read his letters out. They would be transcribed. He would think about it for 30 days, and then he would know what he was wanting to write. So it is possible, if you've been thinking about it, for a long time for you to do that. I'm not saying that was the case.
That could be, but he didn't make any changes to his appeal.
Well, that's a mistake. Usually the editing. One of the quotes that John Caples has is from a poet named France, Antoine France, I think.
Yeah.
And he says the first 4 times he writes something, it sounds like anybody, but the 5th time, it sounds like his own unique voice. A lot of these people would write headlines, 25 headlines, to come up with the right one. So what you're saying is what the masters are saying, that it takes a lot of work, particularly for headlines, a lot of work, and you don't want to rush the process.
Headlines can be excruciating.
Now, speaking of headlines, his most famous ad was, "They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play." And that was so popular, it was spoofed by vaudeville comedians, kind of like the equivalent of Saturday Night Live today.
Yeah.
And here's a ripoff that he did. "They grinned at me when the waiter spoke to me in French, but their laughter changed to amazement at my reply." Now that's the same ad with different words.
Bien sûr, monsieur.
Here's another one. "How a faux pas made me popular." That was for Arthur Murray. Now, interestingly enough, a prophet is never respected in his own home.
Yes.
His dad was a doctor, his mom was a socialite, and he was showing some ads. He had gotten some accolades, and his mom says, "Oh, don't show this to your dad." So, he wasn't respected. I'm sure you've had this before too, where people didn't respect what you did. But he was a brilliant man. What I like about John Caples is he kind of has that Babe Ruth quality. He can hit and pitch. By that I mean he was great at testing. That was probably what he's more known for. But he's a brilliant writer too, and that's a lethal combination. Most people are good at one or the other. Some people aren't even good at one. Some are mediocre in both. But if you can combine them, boy, that's really strong.
Well, I'll tell you about something I did once. At one particular employer, we had a monthly account review, and they would project my returns for a client up on this big screen. And I was pointing out to my employer that I had 2 promotions out for the same client that were exactly the same, everything inside, but they had a different carrier teaser. And I said, if you look at the one there, I think it's quite mediocre, the returns. You can see it. That's one of the great things about direct marketing. It's, down to the penny.
Yes.
And I would think I have to come up with something new. But I said, look at the other one. I said, just because there's a different headline, we're 25% ahead of the other one.
Right.
And I said, this other one is good enough. I mean, it's actually breaking even or making a little money in the acquisition of donors. This I feel good enough about to go to the client and ask them for permission to mail more. And I said, the only difference is my teaser. And I said, I think around here maybe we should make a point of doing an A-B split test just with carrier teaser, because it's certainly easier to roll out a success than have to come up with something totally new and then have the client run the risk of the new thing not working.
Yes, I agree with you on that.
And, I tried to share that with some of my colleagues, but it never became standard procedure at the agency.
Really? That's disappointing. Well, he talks about 3 kinds of headlines. And for emails, there's more of a correlation between headline. The headline's the subject line. Of course, the sender's important. For direct mail, it's a little bit harder because is the headline just the carrier? Well, sometimes there's, you have a closed-faced carrier, you don't even tell who the sender is. So it's maybe the carrier in the first line, the overline. It's a little bit confusing. But anyway, he has 3. First is self-interest. And the way I like to think about that is maybe self-interest could be the desire for recognition that we commonly use in a museum mailing. I like to be honored by name. Or maybe the desire to feel good about myself because I'm a generous person. But that's the first category, and he thinks that's the best one, self-interest. The second is news, and news might be like, I know you've done some work for seniors groups. It might be on some Trojan horse provision that will take away from their estate or deny them Medicare or whatever it is. News is, and then the third he mentioned was curiosity, and he was dubious about curiosity. He said for every one that worked, a dozen failed. He said curiosity, and he gave a lot of examples in the book, like this little piggy went to market, like as a bad curiosity teaser. Nobody really cares. Curiosity is a tough one. You need to combine it with self-interest or something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, he says that in his book, that you have to combine it with something else. I've thought, I can do curiosity, and I haven't done it successfully just by itself. Mm-hmm. The first two you mentioned, though, I mean, boy, did that get hammered into me reading his book when I was a junior copywriter, News and Self-Interest. And I remember I got assigned to write something for a tax limitation group early on in my career. And I sweat over that first line of the copy, and so much so that I still remember what it was all these years later.
What was it?
It said, I urgently need you to help me stop a plan now in Congress that would raise your taxes to record high rates. So that's news and self-interest right off the bat.
You got both. That's great. Yeah.
Getting right in step with the reader.
Interesting.
And my mentor used to talk about the purpose of the first line is to get you to read the second one.
Right, yeah, second and third, that's right.
Yeah, and I think that headline did that. And I was kind of laughing at myself. Yesterday I was writing copy for an organization, and that old headline or that old first sentence came back to me.
Right.
And I just did a takeoff on that in the copy that I'm still working on today.
I know my first copy that I ever read and wrote, rather. And it's interesting because I don't really write in this niche much at all, actually. But I was given a client that wasn't doing that well. The decision you make today could mean the difference between free sex and sex-free schools. So that is the first line of copy. At least it's interesting.
Yes, it is. I won't ask if you had an involvement technique in there.
But it was the best mailing for the year. So, and it's interesting that line of copy was like the fifth line. But Frank Slinkman, a guy I worked with, said, oh, no, that's your start. Said, an experienced eyes will always know where you should start it. And so often in letters, there's filler at the beginning.
There's too much warm-up.
That's right. It's nothing wrong with writing it. You just have to edit it out.
I've mentored some people over the years, and I remember telling one person, and they said, how's my letter? And I said, you have an excellent first line. Unfortunately, it's buried on page 3.
That's common. Usually it's not page 3, it's usually page 2, from my experience.
Yeah.
But that is interesting. One of my favorite chapters of tested advertising methods is chapter 8. And it's how to put enthusiasm into advertising copy. And I think a lot of people don't do that. And he talks about some salesman coming, and he wasn't that good, but he was so enthusiastic about what he was talking about, and it was infectious, and how that's important. And this is what he says, why it's so hard to get started. I know we've all had that problem, writer's block, how do I start this? He said the human brain is like an automobile engine. It works best when it's hot. When you sit down to write, your brain is cold. This means that sitting down and writing a beginning for an ad is like trying to drive an automobile up a steep hill with a cold engine. The experienced copywriter knows that the most important part is the beginning. So he says, just start writing, and then it'll come to you through editing. An experienced copywriter revealed, I don't like to write, but I do like to edit copy, and I am exceptionally good at that. So I write fast and get my thoughts down on paper, and that's the job is merely editing. So that's another way to think of it. What kind of techniques do you have, kind of like if you're slow?
Well, I was taught that I don't have to start with dear so-and-so, and then the first line of the letter. Start wherever you can. I switched for a number of years to writing my PS first.
Interesting.
It doesn't mean that the end of the letter isn't going to be changed later on, but the focus of the PS, when you need urgency and a call to action and to be pithy, that helped sharpen things for me. I also, for many years, didn't even do the headline or the teaser copy at first, because my understanding of the issue, and especially putting in emotion into the promotion, would evolve. Now it is quite common for me to start with my outer envelope teaser, or the look of it, or is it going to be closed face, but am I going to have some sort of personalization on it that makes you want to open it up?
Yeah, I saw that in your recent one for Custer. Yeah, that personalization.
Yeah, so I now usually have my outer envelope set the tone for the rest of the piece. So, it's like, for me now, it's like the cover of a book. And I'll write the chapter 1, which is the page 1 of the letter, next. But the cover of my book goes first, because I'm able, for me, it just came from experience, the way I thought about it. I don't fumble around as much as I used to.
Right.
I used to sit down and for the first hours would just write down all of the points I wanted to make
like
in
bullets.
the copy. Bullets, that's right. A sentence or two. Some of it was the facts about whatever it is that I needed to convey. I'd like, I got to have all of this checklist in here. It's kind of like...
How about research? Is that what you start with if you're not familiar with the client, what they do?
Yeah, but I try to get familiar with the client. I'll have the client send me things, and then I will tell them when they're sending me stuff that I'm going to be studying it, and then I'm going to call them. And I want to do a phone interview.
Right.
And I did that with Custer National Battlefield Museum a few months ago. And because I have to make sure that I understand their mission and what they want to raise money for, and where they've been, why they do what they do. And sometimes you're only going to really pick up on that by talking to the people. But
it's a vital part of it. The most recent prospect mailing I've done for a new client was for the Truman Presidential Library in Kansas City, or actually Independence, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
I read the book by David McCullough, and when I was doing it, I was thinking, well, what could I use in the letter? What would appeal to various list constituencies? Kind of thing. Do you ever do that, where you're kind of thinking, okay, maybe I should take the letter this way based on what you're researching?
Yes, an awful lot, is going to depend on the list. I wanted to be skeptical about that early on when I was a cub copywriter. I understood, you can't mail a power tool catalog to somebody who doesn't do, workshop type stuff, or have a blue-collar job, if woodworking's not their hobby. But I, once again, was thinking, as long as it's an active person, maybe I could get them to at least open it up. But I didn't think it through that much. And I always used to hear that the list was the most important thing, and it is, and the market. So I try to think about that market and who those people are and what's important to them.
So you write the copy to appeal to them. And sometimes it's a diverse coalition,
I do. I'm always thinking about those people. I was taught to write to one person, and that's fine. There's a lot to be said for that, to make the copy very conversational, if you will. which is good for direct mail. But I think about writing to the market.
Right, absolutely. Well, it's interesting, getting back to Caples, he had 6 opening sentences that you should consider. One is interrupting ideas, like I just interrupted you. And that's so, like, he gave an example. The hit at the annual chemical show was a pair of skunks in a plastic cage. That'd be for a deodorant ad. The shocker. If you follow doctor's advice and are over 60, there's a 60% chance you'll be a victim of a medical disaster. Well, you'd want to read about that to try to avoid that. That's a self-interest one. It also has a news quality. Then there's third is news. He gave an example, a preview. If an example of that is, if you're shocked at how much Washington's super spenders spent overboard last year, hang on to your wallet. That might be kind of a little bit like your tax limitation one. A quotation is a 5th, and a story is the 6th. So he has that. If you use that as a guideline, it's very helpful. And he says all the attributes of these, and these comes from his studying of Reader's Digest, which he worked on for a long time. You know, which were the most popular magazine articles, and then the most popular opening sentences. You know, from the headline to the first sentence. They're fast-paced, telegraphic, specific, few adjectives, and I think that's important, few adjectives, and they arouse curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, as I said earlier, he was a mail order specialist, so he, unlike the advertisers who kind of, you can't really tell if they're really helping your brand or not because there's so many other things it's hard to measure. You could always... he knew exactly how well he was doing. And that was a little bit, not as respectable, if you will. But in the Depression, it was very desirable, where people were back against the wall. He thrived while others didn't. Interesting thing about him is he never really retired from copywriting. Even the great Claude Hopkins, after a certain period, he would give guidance to others. People go into management or something. He at heart was a copywriter. He always was very good at research and testing. Probably more known for that than the creative, if I had to say, one or the other, but he was strong at both, like Babe Ruth, strong at pitching and hitting. Just a brilliant man.
Well, those pioneers, we have to have a lot of respect for them. And human nature doesn't really change over the years. And maybe technology does. I get kind of a bemused smile as I read some of his later chapters there, letting people know that computer programming now allows you to have the salutation addressed to a person. And so we've
been doing that for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it tells you how dated his book was, but the ideas expressed in it are not dated.
That's true. Well, what I said about emails is I think it's more like the old-fashioned headline. I mean, it's closer to it than... So emails are actually more retro in a sense. It's an easier thing to study and master.
The problem, I'm just going to put this as an aside. You can edit it out if you want, but... and I don't want to say that email fundraising gets no respect from me, but it's just so easy to point and click and get rid of it. And
well, that's a big problem they have.
But it's quite different.
Right.
If you've got a really good physical piece of mail in front of you.
Right.
And I don't care whether it's the teaser or three-dimensional or... I mean, as you know, I've done things with clear plastic tubes with an American flag in it.
But they both have their place. They can go hand in hand. As I was talking to my friend, he said his group does 15-to-1 non-ask for every ask. You can share videos. There is a place for email. It's just that a lot of practitioners of emails, because it's so cheap, have put little thought into it. So I think that's the problem. And that most of the talent goes into the direct mail than the email in a typical agency.
Well, if your friend is making the emails a relationship where
that's what he is,
I'm going to open it up because there's a video that I'm interested in, and you didn't try to sell me something or ask me for money, then I agree. I think they're probably using it right.
Right.
I also think it can be very powerful in that you can send something out, particularly, say, for a political campaign, something that's hot and topical, and there's a primary coming or something, and you've got a campaign commercial you want to run in New Hampshire or something. You send it to, one of your donors, and you say, would you send this to 2 of your friends?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent technique.
So now all of a sudden the friends are getting it, people you wouldn't find on any email list.
That's an excellent technique.
And they're working for you now. They're helping you organize your campaign.
Right.
And that's very, very
for
powerful.
candidates, emails are really strong, a strong medium for sure.
So, I have respect for it, but I do think that from what I've seen, most groups that use it don't use it effectively. They do it because it's cheap. And I had one guy I remember meeting with, he was new to the board of a successful direct mail client I was working on. And he brought up in the meeting about doing email. And he said, well, I can send, 1 million emails for $200 or something like that. And I thought, good luck with that. And he was the kind of stuffed shirt that, he arrived 2 hours late to the meeting. He never apologized.
That's kind of like you.
What a jerk. What a jerk.
You're usually 10 or 15 minutes late.
Well, at least I apologize, No, I'm not that
I was
bad.
late today, though, myself. So
Well, that's true. You texted me 3 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start. I'm just glad that you remembered to come. Anyway, he ended up later sending out his million, and I don't think he got a single response back.
Wow. That's something. I've heard of that. It's just terrible information, no value.
It's not that easy.
No, it's a hard thing to get people to part with their money. You have to get you offer something of value.
And I also worked for somebody in the very early days of email, and they thought, and they were experimenting, so I won't fault them too much, but we would send out 1 million, and I think one of them we got back 2 contributions. Mm-hmm. 2 out of 1 million.
Well, I think one of them was like the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame was like 1 million. That's the story I heard, 1 million, and they got 2.
Really?
Yeah.
Because 2 contributions.
They didn't target well, yeah.
Oh,
but that was before email was oversaturated as it's been now. The open rates have been, dropping continuously.
Which makes it all the tougher.
It does, and then people send out. I had a guest, and I don't want to contradict them, but they sometimes send out the same email, like today and tomorrow, and without any change, even the change of the headline. Maybe they'll change the headline, and they weren't rotating non-asked emails. I'm not saying you have to do 15 to 1, but try maybe 2 to 1, or even 1 to 1, giving value versus an ask for money.
Right.
A lot of emails, they meander. They don't offer. I mean, there are some good emails. I see some great contests. Like you can have your lunch with the candidate you like, or whatever, or some nice contests and things like that. I do see some good stuff, but I see some really bad stuff in emails that you wouldn't see in direct mail because it costs too much. If it costs you, like let's say a package of 40,000. You get in the mail for 50 cents. That's $20,000. If it does a bomb, if it bombs, let's say it does 50 cents in over out, you lose $10,000. And you remember that because that hurts.
Yes, it does.
An email that bombs, it doesn't hurt as much, and so the quality is not there. You just don't have it.
And unfortunately, you turn a lot of people off very quickly. And you don't want that.
No, you don't.
I think a better way to get email names is the one that we just talked about, where you have somebody who's on your email list already, send it to their friends. And then maybe there's an ask or something, a poll for them to fill out, then you eventually
ask them to participate.
You eventually ask them for money.
Well, it's interesting. Museums you think of are pretty tough for emails. But one of the things that does work for a museum is kind of a recognition, like saying you have an air show, will you sponsor this air show? That kind of thing does work, actually.
And that has sort of a news element to it.
Sure, absolutely. But it's interesting to me, though, that if you are an email practitioner or you're doing Google AdWords or something like that, you really need to read tested advertising methods probably even more than a direct mail guy.
Well, I think you'll be a stronger e-marketing person if you not only read that book, but you come out of direct mail.
Oh, absolutely.
And then get into e-marketing.
True.
Because I think that's going to make you a far stronger marketer than you might be otherwise, just because of the constraints that are on. As you mentioned, it's so cheap to send an email.
Well, anyway, I want to end with chapter 11. This is advice, and some people contradict this because they say a letter should look like a letter. This is 20 ways to increase selling power of copy. Use present tense second person. For instance, don't say, people will enjoy a sense of security when they use Goodyear tires. Say, you enjoy a sense of security when you use Goodyear tires. Use subheads. You use subheads a fair amount.
I do. That's the interesting thing for me.
You didn't always. Craig Cap kind of.
Craig Cap got me doing that because he was doing it successfully, and I may have said this in one of your other shows, but after I read his latest effort, I walked down to his office down the hall and I said, Craig, your direct mail reads like a newspaper ad, a space ad.
Right, he took that as a compliment. That's what it's called.
He looked up because he came out of an advertising background.
Well, this is one of the things in number 3, put captions under illustrations. Because a lot of people don't understand what it is. The picture of what you're supposed to be thinking or what you're supposed to get from it. Use a simple style of writing. I know you do that. That's the 4th. Give free information. That's value. You think of why the magalogs are successful, because it gives a lot of value. In fact, sometimes the magalogs are better than the magazine or newsletter you get. Choose simple words, obviously. Selling copy versus style copy. He's talking about how, you want something that's kind of direct and to the point. Arouse curiosity. Make your copy specific. That's really important. There's been a lot of tests about being specific helping. It's more credible. Even like a specific number. Like 497 is more believable than 500, for example. If that's one.
That's true. My mentor was so concerned about that, and I was writing for a political action committee, and they wanted to spend $100,000 on TV in Missouri, the client.
You should say 95,000.
And he said, call him back. He said, is 100,000 the real number? And I said, yes. And he said, call him back and ask him if it could be 98,000 or 102,000. Because he said 100,000 sounds like he didn't put much thought into it.
That's right. That's interesting. Well, he said, Hersch Gordon Lewis said it wasn't just enough to say, like, April 22nd, say, Wednesday, April 22nd, or Wednesday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. there will be a meeting, that kind of thing. So specificity is really important. Long copy, there's no question that long copy tends to outperform short copy in most tests, particularly for prospects.
I split tested that once.
And long copy won?
Yes.
Okay, well that's good. Otherwise I'd be telling you wrong.
I cut out half of what was in there, and I was mainly the first page opening and the page 4 close.
Right. And
I cut out 2 and 3, and 2 and 3 needed to be in there.
That's right. Well, I did an interesting test one time. It was signed by a lady who was a B-29 pilot. She's one of the, that's the big plane that dropped the bombs in Japan, right? Mm-hmm. And Fifi. And I cut her story short because I wanted to tell the story of the women pilots of World War II. So I had a 4-page letter. But then I tested it against a 5.5-page letter that told her story. And she had some good stuff in there, like when she was a young pilot, people would get out of the plane when they see that she was going to fly the plane.
Oh, my goodness.
So I don't know what I was thinking. People liked her story. So if that's something I've learned, people, the signer, you really want to use your signer, whatever connection they have. That's very relatable copy. And you don't want to cut that. You don't want to cut the rapport, the building blocks. It makes me feel like I have a relationship with you. I know you. I know your story. Once you hear that, you think, oh, God, that must have been tough.
Well, and then it makes you understand why they need a museum for those pioneering female pilots.
That's right. Yeah, so I learned something by testing that, and the longer copy did better, is my point. And significantly better, actually. It surprised me. I mean, it wasn't like double, but it was a good 10% better.
Oh, it was a time for them to get some respect.
Yeah, let me go through some. He said use mail order methods in direct mail advertising. Of course, we've done that a while. If you're selling a hat, show a picture of it. A lot of the same techniques that we'll use
with a caption.
Yeah, with a caption, like Franklin Mint uses, working what we do in direct mail fundraising. Study the selling copy and mail order catalog. So I would say study all your competitors, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Even before I throw stuff out here, I'll take a look at stuff and I'll say, hey, I like what they did, and I may tear a page out of an ad just to hold on to it.
That's a good idea. Get help from others. Of course, but if you're listening to this podcast, you're getting help, so that's useful. I'm not saying everything I say is right or you say is right, but maybe some of it is. Maybe it gives you some ideas.
Well, last Friday I ran into a couple of people in the business, and they came up to me and shook my hand, and a big smile. They said, I've been listening to your Jim Newberry podcast that you're on.
They listen to the Donor Doctor.
They do.
That's good. Well, they're getting help. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about giving away information. But what if they're deserving? Anybody that listens, because it's frustrating to me. People that I know, they'll ask me a question. I say, well, I covered that in a podcast. But they wouldn't go to the effort, So some people are ambitious, others aren't. It's unfortunate, but that's just
the ones who aren't ambitious aren't worth your time, Jim.
Well, absolutely.
If they're not lifelong students of learning, they don't have the love for what they do.
Well, I think most people are like ducks. The baby ducks, if you notice them, are working really hard to stay up with the pack, or whatever you call a duck herd. But once they get up to that middle level, they're content. They don't want to be, most of them don't want to be the head duck. They're just happy to be there. And that's what I've noticed with most people in the industry. I'm not saying everyone. I'm just saying.
Unfortunately, that could be in every industry.
Oh, I think you're right. They're just happy. They don't want to be the worst. And it's not that much different from my son played AAU basketball, so I'd have to go watch the practices. And there'd be, and I saw a couple of his high school practices too, and there would be real competition when they did sprints among the 2 or 3 fastest to be the fastest. But the other competition was to avoid being the slowest. And then the people in the middle, they really weren't trying. They just as long as they're in the middle and couldn't be criticized, they wouldn't be the first to be, that they seem to be content with that. That seems to be what I see a lot. The last one he mentions urged the reader, and obviously donor in our case, to act. We really have to get them off the fence. That's a big part, of the ask. I probably should have an episode on that, on how to ask people for money, how to get them off the fence, what to do.
How to motivate them.
How to motivate them, yes, absolutely. Well, anyway, it's a book. There's different versions. The 5th edition was written by a colleague of his. I like it. There's some people who prefer the earlier ones, which are available through Amazon too. I read the first one. I think probably was the 3rd or 2nd edition, and nobody told me to read it. But I'd heard of the Caples Award. Of course, you've heard of the Caples Award. It's the top,
I have. It's up there with the Echoes International Award.
You've won several Echoes. I know that. What's 3 or 4?
7.
7. Okay, 7's nice. The Donor Doctor has never applied for one of these. I regret that. I'm not saying I would have won. Who knows? But I've won, some others, obviously.
Well, I once, early in my career, applied for a Caples.
Right. It's supposed to be more on copy, right?
I didn't. Yeah, it's on copy, and I took my letter and I put it on a very large piece of paper, reproduced it so that I could, around it, kind of like an artist, have commentary, and I pointed out, really almost every paragraph why it was there. And but I still lost.
It's a useful exercise, though, when people do that.
It was for me, because I had justification for every single sentence in that.
Imagine that.
Package.
I mean, most people don't do that. I mean, or even think that.
Well, that's why I can't write a direct mail appeal in 5 hours.
Right.
Well,
you could probably do a house letter if you're familiar with the.
If I'm familiar with it, yes.
I mean, there's a big difference
it's
between
simple.
What I was talking about earlier when I had to read like an 800 book by David McCullough for Truman,
right?
Versus a client that I know backwards and forwards.
Right. But I think some things can be very simple, but they still have the rules, and you're used to it.
Right.
But it's kind of like, driving back and forth to the same grocery store.
Right.
But if you're trying to pioneer across the wilderness...
If you're being a Lewis and Clark, it takes a lot longer.
It sure does. And
particularly developing techniques like you have, like your tube mailings, for instance, to get the postal regulations and all that kind of stuff. It takes a lot more.
It does. I've had, I'll let you go here, but I've had appeals take 6 months in development just to make sure that we could mail what we wanted to mail, and it could be developed in a cost-effective way.
Really?
And
6 months, that's a long time. So you have to plan ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And I once had an idea that I wanted to do, and I kept a sample that I'd gotten in the mail. It was for commercial and had a film strip in it that you would hold up.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one, a Poly.
It did, and
Poly Gold.
It took over 20 years for me to have the right client to do it. But then I finally had a political action committee that had TV ads, and I sent them that little gizmo so that they could see frame by frame with the storyboard.
I think that one's from Maxie's too, as I recall.
It may have.
Yeah, it was unique. I mean, that's the kind of thing that gets awards because it stands out so much.
Yeah.
And it did well, too. It performed. So it wasn't just one that was clever. It was also one that performed.
I mean, it was entertaining.
It was entertaining, and that's a big part of what we do.
And I think that's part of building the bridge to people.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, Stuart, I appreciate you talking about John Caples with me. Again, the book is Tested Advertising Methods. I encourage you to read it. This is The Donor Doctor. Till next time, I'm signing out. Bye.